Alrighty, so we have learned about the Spanish Empire, and today we'll look at the British Empire and we'll kind of compare and contrast. We'll only talk kind of briefly about the British Empire. In World 2, we'll concentrate mostly on the Spanish Empire. Next year, of course, in U.S. history, you'll talk more about the British in North America. Okay, so let's keep in mind here, this is what our map looks like here. This is the Spanish Empire, if you recall, in both in North and South America. And so we're looking at the space of decades, right, that they established this. And in fact, over a century, the Spanish maintained this, they start to build this empire. So the English and France, of course, or excuse me, the English and French see what the Spanish and Portuguese have been up to, and they think, aha, we've got to have an empire for ourselves. So they come here to North America, which they think, again, they have no idea how big it is. So they thought, well, we can't do anything about the Spanish. We're not strong enough to beat them. But I bet if we come here, we could cross through and still find a land passage to India. So they believe this is just a small piece of land. They have no idea the size. They're just going to walk on through and find India. So that's the goal for the British especially, is to find this northwest passage to India. However, by 1763, right, over 163 years-ish, this is what North America begins to look like, right? This is the British territory here, France. So you can see this is going to get tense, right, as all these powers are going to battle it out here in North America through the course of the 1700s. Okay, so let's talk about France. They're going to be a little bit different than what the British or the Spanish. So here's a handy map here of their territory. Notice this. In the mid-1700s, France controlled much more of North America than even England. So this is what they called New France, right? All that blue territory there. It's a huge empire, but there's not a lot of people. The French did not send people over to make colonies or settlements. The French will not bring their families. So they're mostly just there to make money off the land and engage in the fur trade, which will be different than the goals of the Spanish and the English. So two of the major French explorers, I mean, there's a lot of them, and frankly, I suspect you'll learn more about them next year, but Jacques Cartier and Samuel de Champlain, these are the first French explorers that navigated the rivers and named Montreal and Quebec. And so these are probably the most notable of the French explorers. Okay, so now we have New France, right? Massive territory. Spain's been here for probably 100 years. So what are the British going to do? So the British and the Dutch are going to start to compete here for what we will eventually call the 13 colonies. So here's a timeline here. You don't really have to know all of this, just get a sense of what happened. This is what I would concentrate here. So remember, while we're going through these sections, we're looking at 100 or more years in just a few mere pages. So as all good Virginians know, right, the English arrive in Jamestown, Virginia in 1607, but notice in 1609 the Dutch arrive in what is today New York, and of course we'll explain why they have that name. So this is what we're looking at here, New Netherland. But nearby, right, in 1620, the English arrive in Plymouth. And so, as you know from your Thanksgiving stories, they're going to come for religious reasons. So here, when they come to Virginia, they're looking to establish colonies and trade. But by 1620, and we'll discuss some of the religious situations in England, we've got a group known as Puritans, right, that are escaping religious persecution. And so they decide to come to the New World. So 1644, P.S. a lot's been happening in England, but the king at the time is Charles II, and he gives his brother, the Duke of York, what? Notice that name, permission to get rid of the Dutch, hence the name New York and not New Netherland. So by 1750, so you guys do the math, from 1607 to 1750, 1.2 million English settlers live in what is the 13 colonies. So that's extraordinary, right? The French just don't have that many people, so it's easy by 1763 that the English will beat out the French too and control all of this, right? North America. Well, except for, excuse me, French-speaking Canada. Okay, so this 1763 is a big war. In the colonies, or in America, we call it the French and Indian War. That means the English were fighting the French and Indian together. In European history, we call it the 7 Years' War. So it's a huge war, dare I say, the First World War, but more on that later. Okay, so let's compare the British Empire and the Spanish Empire. What is the same? This, right? They're both going to mistreat native populations. They're there to establish colonies and empires, and both colonies, or both European countries, will make use of slavery. More on that later. And both are there to make money from trade. So here's a map there of 1763. So you can see the two big powers there in North America are the English and the Spanish. So what is different? Well, obviously the English come 100 years later, so they know a little bit more what to expect than the Spanish did. They will fight other European nations for territory, right? They will fight the Dutch and the French for territory. They are also looking, remember, they're still, like the Spanish are there, I guess, to say for the possible goal is to reach India, only they're thinking that they can cross over the land and avoid the Spanish altogether. And religion is a different motivation. So the Spanish, who are Catholics, are there to convert native populations to Catholic Christianity. Because, we'll talk about this later, there's some massive religious changes happening in Europe. So they're there to make more Catholics. But the English are not there really to convert Native Americans. That might come later. But most of them are coming initially because they are escaping religious persecution in England. And soon, as you know from our own history, this will become more and more common factor. Okay, so this is going to be a short video. But side note, what I think is interesting, some Europeans got along with the native populations, most notably the French and the Dutch. Because in the Americas, they were there to make money. So they established a lot of trading relationships. A lot of French men would come over and have relationships with Native American women, have children. They didn't bring the French families over or the Dutch families over. So they're there to make money, not establish empires. Notice the English and the Spanish are there to impart their culture and religion and all this kind of stuff, which then, of course, leads to a lot of problems with the native populations. So I picked this. This is the Dutch flag, and they're having good times. And look at these guys. They're dancing. Everybody's friendly. Right? Good times were had by all.